Welcome to another edition of Boom and Bust here at the News Forum, where all voices matter. I am your host, Tony Clement, as we attend to our knitting virtually with the ongoing COVID pandemic. Of course, Canada right now is undergoing an unprecedented health crisis and at the same time an economic crisis simultaneously. The Parliamentary Budget Officer projects a $252 billion deficit for the fiscal year 2020-21. And indeed, the national debt could be over $1 trillion. Recently, the C.D. Howe Institute think tank indicated that there is no fiscal capacity to withstand another economic lockdown. And that was co-written by David Dodge, who's a former governor of the Bank of Canada. And so we need to somehow restart economic growth. And at the same time, as we're basically seeing looming over us, a GDP crisis and an economic, a fiscal deficit crisis that we're facing. Incidentally, the GDP shrank by 9% just in the month of March, and it is projected to shrink by 4.5% in 2020. Joining me to discuss this topic and other relevant topics is the Member of Parliament for Carleton Riding, the Honourable Pierre Poilievre, who is also the Finance Shadow Minister, that is to say, the finance critic for the official opposition, the Conservative Party of Canada, in Canada's Parliament. Pierre, welcome to the program.
Good to be with you, Tony.
Thank you for joining us. And I'll just get right to the meat of the issue. How do you see the economic position of Canada right now?
We went in weak, and now we're flat on our backs. The question is whether we can get off the mat and beat the 10 count. Right now, our GDP is plummeting and our debt is soaring. You correctly pointed out that we have roughly $250 billion deficit this year. That will bring Canada's national debt to nearly $1 trillion. And that is on top of massive new provincial government debts, as well as enormous new debts in the business and household sectors. So when you combine the households, the businesses, and the governments, this year we will probably have a debt to GDP ratio of about 400%. That's to say we have $4 of debt for every $1 of economic output. That is by many orders of magnitude the biggest we have seen in Canada since modern record keeping began.
That is an incredible statistic. I want to bring it down to the average Canadian, perhaps watching this program. What does that mean for Canadians, both presently and also in the future?
Well, it means a greater share of household, business, and government budgets will go to pay interest. And that is right now in a low interest rate environment, right? So Canadians are spending near record levels on debt servicing, that is paying the principal and the interest on their debts as a share of their income. And that's, again, in an environment where interest rates are lower than they've ever been. The worry we have, Tony, is when interest rates rise, is we've got this enormous stock of debt. The flow of interest payments from that stock is moderate now by comparison to some previous years, particularly in the early 80s. But as soon as rates rise, then families are going to be pushed over the edge. In fact, governments will face massive new interest expenses. I did a check to find out what kind of a mortgage broker we have in Ottawa these days to find out how long is our debt locked in for at a federal level, right? We've got $1 trillion of debt. Is it short term or is it long term? Now, you'd think, Tony, when you get a mortgage, you lock in low rates. If I'm renewing my mortgage in July, for example, I'm going to take a 5-year fixed because I want these low rates locked in. Well, you'd think the government would be doing the same thing by lending for the long term borrowing for the long term. In fact, they're doing exactly the opposite. They're selling short-term bonds and treasuries that are immediately sensitive to interest rate hikes. So instead of borrowing at 1.1% for 30 years and keeping these low rates for a generation, they're borrowing for 90 days, 2 years, and 3 years. Almost none of our debt they've taken on since March is long-term. So that means as soon as those rates go up, the bills are going to come piling in for the government.
So you have been involved both in person in Parliament and in the virtual side of Parliament, asking specific questions of the Finance Minister, Bill Morneau, and other government representatives. What sort of questions have you been asking, and what sort of answers have you been getting?
Well, many and few. Many questions, few answers. Tony, yesterday I was in the House of Commons and I said to the Minister of Finance, we owe roughly $250 billion to foreign lenders. This is the government of Canada. And I said, how much do we owe to the People's Republic of China? How much do we owe to Saudi Arabia? How much do we owe to other foreign interests who are buying up our debt and therefore controlling our future destiny and taking our future tax revenues in the form of interest payments? And he didn't have an answer. I followed up with his department. They say they don't even keep records on that. So you'd think that in this geopolitical environment, the government would want to know to whom it is we owe money. But for some reason, they don't even keep records of these things. It really raises the question of who's mining our store.
You raise a very good point. We have with us Pierre Poilievre, who is the finance critic for the official opposition, the Conservative Party of Canada, with us here on Boom and Bust. But I've always been trying to grapple with, and I've asked previous guests, how do we communicate the importance of fiscal probity to the average Canadian? And usually it's about future taxes and burdening future generations. But it's also about sovereignty. It's also about our ability to make decisions for ourselves as individuals and as a nation, which is going to be hamstrung by this excessive borrowing. Is that part of the path that you are taking on this, Pierre Poilievre?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the fundamental problem with our economy, Tony, is that we consume more than we produce. We buy more than we sell. The only way to pay for it is borrowing. So ironically, the foreign powers that sell us the goods that we consume then lend us the money to pay for it, which sounds like a wonderful deal in the short term, but in the long run, it means we just pay them interest and they collect. They get the rocking chair money, sit back and let us pay them interest on debts we've irresponsibly accumulated. And at some point, interest rates will rise. Even the governor of the Bank of Canada, Governor Polos, came to Finance Committee, was asked, will interest rates rise? So absolutely they're going to rise. So the question is, what happens to your household when interest rates rise and you can no longer make your mortgage payment? What happens when your government says it's going to raise your taxes because its interest costs have gone up? So 1% effective rate increase on the $1 trillion federal debt would cost the government $10 billion. So that's roughly what the government raises by 1 percentage point of the GST. So let me ask you this, Tony. How long will it take before Justin Trudeau says, oh my goodness, we've got all these interest charges on our $1 trillion debt? Justin Trudeau will tell us he needs to raise the GST to pay for it. So how is your family, which will then be struggling to barely hold on to your home because your interest on your mortgage is too high, cope with higher consumer prices driven by the GST hike from the Trudeau government? These are real, tangible questions. And so there we go from the abstract of, a bunch of politicians and Scottish accountants telling you, we've got too much debt and we really have to tighten our purse strings. We go from that abstraction to everyday people saying they can't pay their bills anymore because too much of their budget is going to pay interest to wealthy lenders.
You're not the first person to suggest that the answer of the Trudeau government to the excessive debt that we now have is to hike the GST by 1, 2, or 3 points.
Yep.
Have you had a straight answer from them on that policy point?
No, we haven't. I mean, in fairness, I have not asked that exact question. I asked yesterday whether Morneau and the government would raise taxes to pay interest on its exorbitant debt, and the minister said they have no plans to do so. Of course, as you know, with these guys, plans change. So I think between you and I, Tony, and don't tell anybody this except for your listeners, I think that Trudeau needs an election. He needs to, because he can't raise the GST in a minority parliament. First of all, it wouldn't pass, and second of all, he risks triggering an election that he would lose on that ballot question. So I think what he needs is to and I think what we will see is he will start to make the case that he needs a new mandate to manage the post-COVID world. And so he'll go to the electorate, in his eyes, get a majority, come back, raise the GST by 3 or 4 points, and then he can permanently lock in his high spending at the expense of consumers and families. That is why. So I do think he needs an election in the next, I'm going to say, 6 to 12 months by Canada Day 2021. Because the reality is the math is unsustainable. He simply cannot go on much longer with these budget numbers before he has to do something drastic. And of course, when it comes to this prime minister, it will mean a big tax hike.
There's even been talk, Pierre Poilievre, of a fall election. Do you see that within the realm of possibility?
I do, yes. In fact, I think that's the ideal timing for Justin Trudeau. Look, the debt levels we have in this country are unsustainable. Now, he doesn't want people to know that before they vote. If he can get the election out of the way before interest rates start to rise, then they'll find out the disaster he's created for them only after giving him a 4-year mandate. And then he can sort of, in his view, he'll sort of be able to struggle his way out of the mess over the course of a 4-year period without any accountability, with a massive majority in the Senate. And that's the scenario that he wants to bring about. I think it would be a catastrophe for our country if he got another 4 years, and I think people would walk away with a GST that is 3, 4, 5% higher than it is now, and an economy that reels for many years to come.
Speaking with the Honourable Pierre Poilievre, who's the shadow finance minister for the official opposition in Canada's Parliament, the Conservative Party of Canada. Pierre, thank you for being a guest on Boom and Bust. I want to turn attention to another topic which you did reference a little bit earlier in our conversation, and that is the specter of China, the People's Republic of China, and our relationship with them. Of course, most recently, we did have the court decision on the extradition of Meng Wanzhou, which indicated that she was extraditable. She's the CFO of Huawei, the huge telecom company of China, state-owned enterprise, basically, and she is extraditable to the United States. So obviously, we've got tensions with China. They have 2 of our own citizens basically as hostages in their jails, and then we've got the economic issue of an over-reliance on the supply chain of China. Tell us what you're advocating for, what your point of view is on this, and how you would like to change things.
Well, I think we have an independent justice system that decides whether or not extradition is legal in this case, and it turned out the court ruled it was. So I don't think there's any role for politicians interfering in the case whatsoever. Let the defendant make her case, and let the justice system in Canada, and then ultimately in the United States, when the extradition goes ahead, do its course, and we should stay out of the way. But we certainly can't interfere in a legal process to try and appease the diplomatic demands of the PRC.
And what about supply chain, the issue of our over-reliance on the Chinese supply chain?
Well, I agree that is the problem. The answer, though, is to have a more productive free enterprise economy here in Canada. What I worry about, Tony, is that I think some crafty lobbyists in Ottawa will use this whole controversy about our over-reliance on China as an excuse to stuff their pockets with a bunch of corporate welfare. And we already see it at the Finance Committee. Interest groups show up, and they always stamp the latest buzzword onto their demands for money. You know, a year ago they were saying, "Give us money, we're green." And the year before that, they were saying, "Give us money, we're innovative." And then the year before, 10 years ago, when it was the economic meltdown of 2008, 9, 10, it was, "Give us money, we'll stimulate the economy." And now it's, "Give us money, we're supply chain integrity." So I worry that we're going, and we as conservatives have to be on guard, because yes, we believe in our economic sovereignty and our supply chain integrity and all of that. But remember, corporate welfare does not make our supply chain work. Corporate welfare will not make us more self-sufficient. Corporate welfare will make us weaker and poorer by taking money from businesses that produce to those that do not, from productive, profitable businesses to unproductive, money-losing businesses. So let's not allow a bunch of crafty wordsmiths in the lobbying community stuff their pockets with taxpayers' money because they have cleverly used a buzzword that happens to coincide with our overall objective on foreign policy.
Indeed, you've raised a good point, because I know firsthand that there are companies that are without any government help or suggestion retooling plants to produce domestically supplied personal protective equipment like gloves and gowns and masks. They're doing so because there's a demand. They're actually taking the signals from the marketplace and meeting demand. So that's the kind of thing that we want to encourage, rather than sort of state-owned, state-owned direction on these issues. Is that your point of view?
Well, look at the Cold War. I know that you're a student of history, Tony. In the United States did not win the Cold War, and frankly, the Western world did not win the Cold War by adopting Soviet-style central planning. It did it exactly the opposite. Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher and the other leaders of the free world, Brian Mulroney, did not say, well, we have to build up industry in Canada to counter the Soviet Union, therefore we will have government take over industry or institute command and control economics. No, they did precisely the opposite. They unleashed the power of free enterprise through lower taxes, removing unnecessary regulations, opening up to trade with allies, and that the massive productivity that came out of those policies allowed funding to win the arms race. And so, if we want to stand on our own 2 feet and have economic independence from China, the solution is not to bring in a whole plethora of new government spending and command and control programs to stuff cash into the coffers of well lobbied for companies. No, the answer is to unleash the incomparable power of the free market system to provide us with the goods and services we need to be self-sufficient.
Pierre Poilievre, the shadow finance minister for the Conservative Party. Just one final comment, perhaps, because this is coming to the fore again, is the 5G decision on technology and whether Huawei or another company should be basically in the driver's seat on that. We've seen recently that TELUS and Bell have opted for Ericsson as their supplier of 5G. We have yet to see a decision from the government of Canada, from the Liberal government, when it comes to Huawei. What are your thoughts on this matter?
Well, my sense is that the government's decision now is kind of, now that I think Rogers was already going with Ericsson, now that TELUS and Bell have decided to do the same thing, I don't really know who Huawei would have as a client to install its product on the 5G network. So obviously the government should ban Huawei from our 5G network, but it looks like our telecom companies have effectively done that themselves. And that is it's a convenient escape hatch for Trudeau, who I think wanted to appease the PRC and approve Huawei. But now he can go to them and say, well, our telecoms have chosen another supplier anyway, so what difference does it make?
Last word to you. Where do you see Canada going? Can we bounce back from this economic decline and challenging period?
Absolutely. I mean, other countries have been equally indebted. They did the right things, though, including Canada. Back in 1945, we had more debt than we do now. But in the years 46, 47, 48, the federal government ran monstrous surpluses to pay off those debts. And our soldiers and war industrialists pointed their efforts to building the economy and its productive capacity, and we had an extraordinary period of prosperity through the 50s and early 60s. So that can happen again. And you look at countries like Ireland, which was literally on the verge of bankruptcy a decade ago, and now is roaring strong and has a GDP per capita 70% higher than our own. So we've seen countries before that have been weighed down by debt and on the brink of bankruptcy, as we are right now. But if they unleash the power of enterprise and of our workers and entrepreneurs through the free market, then we can outproduce our debts and we can get back on solid footing. I'm very confident of that. Of course, we need a new government to achieve it, but that too is possible.
That is your challenge and our challenge coming up. Pierre Poilievre, thank you so much for taking some time to be with us on Boom and Bust. It's great having you as a guest. Hope we can have you in the future as well.
Good to be with you, Tony. Many blessings.